and growing concerns over here in the United Kingdom about the ongoing health crisis of His Majesty, the King. The nation has been struck with heartbreaking news as doctors reveal a worrying update about King Charles. What started as quiet concern inside the palace has now spread across the world, leaving millions anxious and emotional. Reports from Sandringham say the king's health has suddenly worsened, and he is now under constant medical care. Buckingham Palace has confirmed that his condition is serious, though they remain hopeful. Inside the royal family, tears have been shed, and prayers fill every corner of the estate. For many, it feels like the kingdom is holding its breath, waiting for a miracle to happen, the news that broke the palace. When the heartbreaking news broke, the entire nation fell into deep worry. Whispers quickly spread through towns and cities as people tried to understand what the king's illness could mean for the country. Everyone had questions, but there were no answers. Reporters crowded the royal grounds trying to catch even a glimpse of what was going on. Soon, guards put up barriers around Sandringham, the quiet estate where the king was resting. The place that once welcomed guests now stood still and guarded with the press gathering outside in the cold rain. The rain didn't stop for hours. It fell softly over the Norfolk fields, washing the roads, dripping from trees, and soaking the royal gates. To many, the endless rainfall felt like the sky itself was mourning. It matched the sadness in the hearts of the people, as if nature understood what they were feeling. Cameras clicked gently in the distance, while television crews stood quietly waiting for any official word. There was no shouting, no chaos, just a strange calmness, like everyone knew something serious was happening behind those closed doors. The black iron gates that marked the entrance to Sandringham carried the royal symbol, one that had always stood for power, duty, and stability. But now that symbol looks different. It didn't shine with pride. It seemed heavy, almost sorrowful, as if it too could feel the weight of the uncertainty hanging in the air. People standing near the gates spoke in hushed tones, afraid that even their voices might disturb the silence that wrapped around the estate. This was not a normal report about a royal family member's health. Those who had long worked close to the palace could tell that something had truly changed. For years, the king had followed a strict daily routine, meeting advisors, signing papers, and reading through important state documents. His study was his favorite place, the heart of his work. But now, that very room stood empty. The desk where he once reviewed letters and official red boxes was left untouched. People who had seen inside whispered that his journal, something he always kept close, was still lying open on the table. No one dared to move it. To many, it felt like a quiet message from the king himself, a symbol that he had carried a heavy load for too long. The thought of it made the staff emotional. Some said it felt like the end of an era was drawing near, though no one could bring themselves to say it aloud. Inside the palace, only a few trusted figures were aware of what was truly going on. Advisors spoke in secrecy, revealing that the king had already made special plans in case he became too weak to continue his duties. Rumors spread that he had written a personal letter outlining what should happen if he could no longer serve. This letter, carefully sealed, was said to be hidden somewhere safe within the estate. According to palace insiders, only 3 people knew exactly what was written in that letter. They were said to be the Archbishop of Canterbury, Princess Anne, and Prince William. The thought of this secret document fascinated both the public and the press. What could it say? Would it change who ruled next? Was it a farewell or an instruction? Nobody knew, but everyone wanted to. As journalists stood in the rain, waiting for official confirmation, conversations began to spread beyond the palace walls. Political figures started debating what might happen if the king was unable to rule. Some wondered whether new laws or changes might soon follow. Others feared it could cause uncertainty for the monarchy's future. Across the nation, from grand offices in London to quiet homes in small villages, people spoke about the king with sadness and respect. They remembered his long years of dedication and kindness, and they prayed for his recovery. Yet beneath all the public concern, a deeper emotion was noticed, one of fear. For many, it wasn't just about the king's health. It was about the stability of the country he represented. The royal family, often seen smiling on balconies and at celebrations, now faced one of the hardest moments in modern history. Back at Sandringham, the rain continued to pour. The castle windows glowed faintly in the gray afternoon light, and the staff moved quietly through the halls. Every sound, the ticking of a clock, the creak of a floorboard, the rustle of footsteps seemed louder than usual. The air felt heavy with worry and love for the man who had led them for so long. As night fell, the estate was wrapped in silence. No one knew what the next day would bring, but one thing was certain. The nation was united in grief, hope, and prayer. And though the king's future remained uncertain, his strength and dignity continued to inspire those who stood by him through the storm. But then, let's take a little rewind on how everything unfolded, the hidden battle behind palace walls. Long before the heartbreaking news was shared with the public, small signs had begun to show that something was wrong. The king's health had quietly started to weaken, though no one outside the palace truly realized it at first. It all seemed like the natural changes that come with age, especially for a man who had stepped into the world's spotlight at 73. What looked ordinary back then now feels far more serious in hindsight. For as long as anyone could remember, the king had always been a man of purpose and endless energy. Even before wearing the crown, he worked tirelessly from dawn till nightfall. He began his mornings by writing letters and reading important reports. His days were filled with meetings, speeches, and public visits. And when everyone else went to bed, he stayed awake studying his government papers, making sure he never missed a detail. But recently, quiet changes had begun to appear. At first, no one thought much of it. Royal watchers noticed that the king's calendar seemed lighter. Some events were postponed, some duties were passed on to others. Occasionally, he took longer breaks at his private homes away from the public eye. The changes were small, almost unnoticeable, but to those who had followed him for years, it was clear that something was shifting. The palace quickly explained that the king was simply adjusting his schedule. They said it was a thoughtful decision to make sure he had time to rest between his royal responsibilities. After all, leading a nation required balance and care. For most people, that seemed completely reasonable. Many even said he was simply following in the footsteps of his late mother, Queen Elizabeth, who had served the country with unmatched dedication for 70 long years. She, too, had known how to pace herself wisely, working steadily until her very last days. But behind the closed doors of the palace, there was a different story unfolding, one that the public didn't yet know. Doctors had been monitoring the king closely, and whispers among the staff suggested that he was receiving a special kind of medical treatment. It wasn't just about rest or slowing down. Something far more serious was happening. According to quiet reports from those close to the situation, the king had begun a special form of therapy designed to help his body fight a rare illness. It was called immunotherapy, a treatment that strengthens the body's own defenses to find and destroy harmful cells. It was not an easy process. The therapy could be exhausting and unpredictable, often leaving patients tired and weak. Yet those who knew the king best said he faced it with courage and calmness, refusing to let it break his spirit. Every day, he continued to do what he could. Even when his strength faded, he found moments to read, to write, and to stay informed about the matters of his people. The palace staff moved quietly, making sure he was comfortable, while the royal physicians worked tirelessly to manage his care. To the public, life at the palace still seemed almost normal, but behind those grand walls, every day felt uncertain. Those who saw him in person said his smile was still gentle, though a little more tired than before. His steps were slower, but his words carried the same warmth and wisdom that had always defined him. It was clear that his body was struggling, but his heart remained strong. The king had always been known for his sense of duty, and now, even in illness, that duty shone brighter than ever. To the nation, he was still their steady leader, a symbol of strength and tradition. Yet, as time went on, people began to sense that something deeper was happening. His sudden breaks, his fewer appearances, and the quiet atmosphere at the palace all pointed to the same truth. He was fighting a battle few could see, Still, he faced each day with dignity, surrounded by love, care, and prayers from millions who admired him. And though the world did not yet know the full story, those closest to him could feel it in the air. The king was fighting not just for his health, but for the crown, for his people, and for the legacy he had promised to protect. The treatment the king was receiving was not simple. It was a very special kind of care that only a few hospitals in the world could provide. Some of these treatments were still being studied by scientists, and every case was different. People who followed the story closely believed that the king was being treated at a famous hospital in Cambridge, known for its advanced cancer research. There, skilled doctors and researchers worked together to give patients the most modern medical attention possible. The king's visits to the hospital were always kept very private. Everything was planned carefully so that the public would not become alarmed. It was said that he often traveled by helicopter in the early morning, when the skies were still gray and quiet. These journeys were short and secret, designed so that very few people would even notice his absence. Whenever the palace spoke publicly, they described these moments as times of rest or short escapes to the countryside. But behind those words was a different reality. These were the hours when the king received focused and demanding medical treatment from specialists who were fighting alongside him. During this difficult time, Queen Camilla became the heart of the royal household. She carried herself with calmness and quiet strength, making sure everything continued to run smoothly while her husband underwent treatment. Though she smiled for the cameras and appeared steady during public events, those close to the family knew how much she was managing behind the scenes. She protected the king fiercely. Every call, every meeting, every request to speak with him went through her first. She knew who could see him and who needed to wait. Those who worked inside the palace said she watched over her husband like a guardian, ensuring that no unnecessary stress reached him. Political discussions, media requests, or even certain family visits were carefully considered before being allowed. It was a heavy responsibility, but she carried it with grace. One former palace worker once compared her role to that of a loyal guardian who shields her partner from the outside world. She made sure that while the king fought his health battle, he was surrounded only by peace and privacy. Nothing was allowed to disturb him. Even Prince William, his eldest son and future heir, had to go through her to see his father. It wasn't because of coldness or distance. It was because she understood how fragile the situation was. Every moment of rest mattered, and every interruption could take away valuable strength. Inside the royal residence, Queen Camilla quietly coordinated everything. The meals, the staff schedules, the communication with doctors, and even the family's day routines. The palace's rhythm changed completely under her watch. She became the king's voice when he couldn't speak to the public, and his comfort when the long days of treatment grew tiring. To the world outside, the royal family continued their duties as best as they could, but insiders could sense that everything revolved around the king's condition. The queen made sure that no rumors escaped, no unnecessary panic spread, and no one violated his right to heal in peace. Those who knew her well said that her calm nature hid a deep determination. She wasn't just protecting a monarch. She was protecting her husband, the man behind the crown, the one who still smiled at her even on the hardest days. Her quiet devotion reminded everyone of the deep bond they shared. Though the palace stood strong, filled with traditions and history, at its core was something simple and human. A woman caring for the man she loved while he faced one of the toughest battles of his life, a quiet shift in the crown's shadow. As the king's public appearances began to grow fewer, the royal family quietly adjusted to fill the gap. Prince William, the Prince of Wales, slowly began stepping into a larger role. It was done with great care and planning, not to alarm the public, but to show that everything was still under control. Every new duty he took on was meant to reassure the nation that the monarchy remained strong and steady, even while the king rested. Soon William's days became filled with official responsibilities. He traveled more often representing his father on important visits, both within the country and abroad. He led meetings, attended grand ceremonies, and handled discussions with the prime minister, tasks that once belonged only to the king. One of the biggest signs of this quiet transition came when William attended the Commonwealth Leader Gathering, a duty usually carried out by the reigning monarch. The palace explained that this was all part of a plan to share responsibilities within the family, making sure that every royal task continued smoothly. To the public, this seemed like a simple arrangement, but those who had followed the royal family for years noticed that it meant much more. William was not just helping his father, he was preparing for the future. He was learning what it meant to carry the weight of the crown, to lead with calm strength and duty. During this period, Princess Anne, known for her loyalty and hard work, also played a deeply important but quieter role. While William stood before the cameras, she worked tirelessly behind the scenes. For decades, she had been known as one of the most dedicated members of the royal family, always focused on her responsibilities rather than attention. Now, her experience became more valuable than ever. Princess Anne made sure that everything in the royal household continued with order and respect. She acted as a bridge between the king, the family, and the officials who managed royal duties. She ensured that traditions were followed and that no matter what was happening with the king's health, the institution remained strong. Her calm judgment kept things running when emotions were high and uncertainty hung over the palace. Around this same time, something deeply personal occurred. It was said that Princess Anne visited a rarely accessed part of Windsor Castle, a private archive filled with the writings and documents of past monarchs. There, among the carefully preserved papers, she found a letter written by her late mother, Queen Elizabeth, just before her passing in 2022. No one outside the family knew exactly what was written in that letter, but those familiar with the story believed it held a message of guidance, a reflection from a queen who had balanced duty and health her entire life. It was said to be both wise and tender, offering quiet advice on how to serve faithfully even in times of weakness. When Princess Anne brought the letter to her brother, the king, he took it gently and read it more than once. The words seemed to reach deep into his heart. Those who were with him said that after that moment he became quieter, more thoughtful. Something inside him had shifted. He spoke less in public and began spending more time alone, often reflecting in silence. His schedule grew even shorter, and his once busy days became simpler and slower. The letter seemed to remind him of what truly mattered. Not just the crown, but the wisdom that comes from understanding when to rest and when to lead. Within the palace, the change in his mood was noticeable. The king, once known for his constant activity, now carried a softer presence. His eyes showed deep thought, as though he was searching for peace in the middle of uncertainty. Staff moved carefully around him, sensing that he was in a time of quiet reflection. Meanwhile, William and Princess Anne continued to guide the royal household with quiet confidence. Together, they became the pillars holding the family steady as the king faced his private battle. The late queen's message, found at just the right time, had reminded them all of the balance between strength and grace, duty and compassion. Those who worked close to the king often said that he had begun spending long, quiet hours near the north, facing windows of Sandringham. It was the same spot where his mother once sat during her early years as queen, signing papers and meeting officials. The sight of him standing there reminded many people of the deep connection between generations, the way history passes gently from one pair of hands to another. But it also carried a sense of sadness, a quiet reminder of how heavy the crown can truly feel. Inside the palace, soft conversations began to grow among his trusted staff. They spoke carefully about the future, about what should happen if the king's health continued to decline. It was during this time, people said, that he wrote a private letter in his own handwriting outlining what he wanted done if he ever became too weak to lead. Only a very small circle of his closest advisors knew of the letter's existence. It was sealed, placed inside a secure vault beneath the chapel at Sandringham, a place few had ever entered. Even though everything was handled in silence, quiet preparations began taking shape behind the scenes. Certain advisors started reviewing long, forgotten plans, updating arrangements, and making sure the royal duties could continue smoothly if the king needed to rest for a long period. None of this was made public, of course. To the outside world, it was business as usual, But the truth began to show itself one afternoon at a charity event in early September. The king appeared in his usual calm and polite manner, smiling for the cameras and greeting guests. Yet those who watched closely noticed something different. When shaking hands with an ambassador, he stumbled slightly. It was only a small moment, but enough to draw concern. His voice sounded softer than usual, and his face seemed tired and pale. The palace released a simple explanation, saying he had been feeling fatigued after a busy week. But those present could sense there was more to the story. Some of his staff quietly shared that he had been struggling to sleep, a side effect of the medication he was receiving. The exhaustion was wearing him down, and though he tried to hide it, his body could no longer keep up with his will. Over the following days, activity around Sandringham grew unusual. Late at night, unmarked vehicles were seen arriving through the side gates, one of them believed to be a private medical transport. Not long after, the royal physician's official car was also spotted pulling into the courtyard. For those who lived nearby, it was clear that something serious was unfolding behind the walls. Still, the palace gave no new statement. Their message remained steady and calm. The king was resting and receiving care. But inside, everyone knew the truth. The situation was getting worse. Staff began working longer hours. Advisors stayed close and security tightened around the estate. The atmosphere was thick with worry. One evening, Princess Anne arrived quietly at Sandringham. Those who saw her car pass through the gates later said that her visit marked a turning point. She and her brother spoke privately for a long time away from everyone else. No one knew exactly what was said between them, but those who were nearby described the meeting as deeply emotional. It seemed to bring a new kind of understanding, a moment when both siblings realized that the path ahead was changing. After that night, things inside the palace shifted once again. The tone grew more serious. The queen remained composed, but the weight of concern could be seen in every corner of the estate. It was clear that the king's condition had reached a critical stage, and those closest to him prepared themselves for whatever news might come next. Late one evening, the princess quietly walked into a small reading room and found the king sitting alone. His hands trembled as he held an old letter written by his late mother. The air in the room felt heavy, filled with memories and silence. When the princess saw the letter, her eyes softened with worry, but her voice was firm. She told him that facing what was real was the only way forward. The king looked up, his face pale and tired. His answer showed how deeply torn he was inside. It wasn't the truth that scared him. It was the thought of what might happen after. He wasn't just fighting his illness anymore. He was fighting the fear of what would become of his crown, his country, and his family if he stepped back. Change in leadership. As the days passed, his strength began to fade faster than anyone expected. By mid-October, it became impossible to keep things running smoothly. People started to notice something was wrong when the king missed several public events in a row. Prince William began spending nearly every day at Sandringham, quietly taking over more duties. Without any official announcement, people started calling him the acting king. Princess Catherine carried on with her royal work as gracefully as ever, her calm nature comforting those around her. Yet those who looked closely could see the weariness in her face, a small but telling sign of the storm that was building behind palace walls. Then one night, everything changed. At exactly 3:00 in the morning, the secure phone in Prince William's room rang. The message from the royal advisor was short and chilling, 7 words that would change everything. It said that the king was no longer fully aware of his surroundings. He wasn't gone, but his mind had become clouded, lost between the present and the past. At one point, he even asked his sister if their mother was still waiting for her coronation. It was heartbreaking to see the proud monarch, now unable to tell time from memory. Inside the palace, everyone knew what this meant. A ruler who could no longer tell what was real could not guide a nation. The crown had always been a symbol of strength, but that night it trembled under the weight of human frailty. That night, the palace became a place of quiet movement and whispered urgency. Every step seemed rehearsed, as if they had long known this moment would come. Royal advisors, lawyers, and constitutional experts gathered behind heavy doors. carefully spreading out papers that would decide the fate of the crown. Among them was a single sealed envelope taken from a hidden chamber beneath the chapel at Sandringham. Inside it lay the king's own words written long before his illness had worsened. When the letter was finally opened, it contained only one clear instruction. If the king's mind ever failed, his duties would be handed temporarily to Prince William, while Princess Anne would remain his closest counselor. It wasn't a farewell or a declaration of abdication. It was something entirely new, a living ruler creating a plan to protect his people even while he still breathed. By dawn, preparations were already in full motion to make the quiet transition happen. To keep control of the news, Sandringham was locked down. Phone lines were cut off, and only a handful of trusted aides were allowed to move freely. A royal helicopter lifted into the dark sky, heading toward Windsor to set the next stage in motion. As all this unfolded, Queen Camilla quietly left the estate under the cover of night. Hours later, word spread that she had flown to Florence, Italy. Some said she needed time away to collect herself, but others close to the family whispered that there had been a deep disagreement. The Queen had not wanted the letter opened. She believed her husband still had a chance to recover and feared that acting on the message would make his weakness official, something that could never be taken back. Her sudden departure during such a fragile moment made many believe that a quiet fracture had opened within the royal household. By morning, the news had reached the world. The front pages of every major paper carried the story of what had happened behind those palace walls. One headline declared that the crown had paused, and that Prince William now carried the weight of royal duty. There was no parade, no ceremony, only a solemn announcement and a nation holding its breath. Power had shifted, not through a dramatic speech, but through calm signatures and steady decisions. Inside the palace, officials avoided calling it an abdication or a regency. Instead, they used gentler words, a soft passing of the torch meant to steady the kingdom without shaking it. But everyone understood what it meant. A new chapter had begun, one that would test the strength of the monarchy like never before. When the crown chose grace over tradition in royal history, it was rare for a ruler to step aside while still alive. Usually, a king or queen only gave up the throne through a long formal process called abdication. But this time was different. The situation was quietly named a soft succession, a gentle way of saying that the king was taking a pause from his duties for health reasons, not leaving forever. The goal was simple: to keep the kingdom steady and the crown secure without the grand ceremonies or political uproar that came with a full abdication. Inside the palace, the hidden plans for such a moment were finally set in motion. It was like a secret machine coming to life. Rules were followed one by one to make sure that every part of the government continued to work, that ceremonies went on as usual, and that the Constitution stayed firm. Life at Sandringham quickly began to change. Prince William, who had quietly trained for this role all his life, now carried the weight of the crown in every decision he made. He became the center of royal affairs, running meetings, approving documents, and staying in constant touch with state officials. Those who worked with him said he was calm and precise, never rushing or losing focus. For days, he wore the same dark suit, working long hours and eating little, as if discipline was his way of holding the royal family together. By his side was Princess Anne, his greatest ally in this difficult time. Her wisdom and experience became his compass. Together, they formed a quiet partnership that kept the kingdom steady. Some people even called it a shared reign, though it wasn't an official title. Anne handled the delicate traditions and dealt with important institutions like the Privy Council and the Church of England. She knew how to navigate the old systems that kept the monarchy connected to the government. The Privy Council, made up of senior officials and respected leaders, became more important than ever. It acted as the bridge between the royal household and the running of the country. Every piece of advice, every decision passed through them to make sure nothing fell apart during the king's absence. Meanwhile, William worked hard to reassure the nation. He appeared calm and compassionate, visiting communities, meeting officials, and ensuring the people felt that the royal family was still strong. Though the throne had not officially changed hands, everyone could feel it. The prince had stepped into a new light, carrying the crown's weight with quiet strength. During this difficult season, the Princess of Wales began to shine even brighter in the eyes of the people. Her calm smile and gentle nature brought comfort when the nation felt uncertain. She visited hospitals and spoke kindly to patients, met children at charity events, and stood proudly beside soldiers at military ceremonies. Through her presence, she reminded everyone of the warmth and dedication once shown by the late Queen Elizabeth. She became a symbol of steadiness and kindness, a quiet light when the country needed reassurance that the royal family still cared deeply for them. But behind the palace walls, not everything was peaceful. Even as the royal family worked hard to appear united, quiet disagreements began to surface. Queen Camilla's absence from Sandringham raised many eyebrows and whispers. She had strongly opposed opening the king's secret letter, insisting it should remain sealed until he recovered. Many close to the family said she truly believed he would get better, and that acting too soon might undo his strength. Yet, when her advice was not followed, she quietly packed her things and left the estate. Her sudden departure created waves across the palace. Her staff, unsure of how to proceed, stopped releasing any statements to the press. One of her most trusted attendants, a woman who had served her for years, reportedly stepped down because she felt uneasy about how things were unfolding. These silent exits only fueled the growing sense that something deeper was happening behind closed doors. Rumors began to swirl that Queen Camilla had once hoped to play a greater role during this crisis, perhaps even a guiding figure while the king recovered. But insiders claimed that both Princess Anne and King Charles himself had decided against giving her that kind of authority. Whatever the truth was, her absence at such a critical moment left the royal household divided. As the newspapers caught wind of the tension, the public began to notice too. Many wondered why the queen had left when her family needed unity most. For some, it felt like her influence had quietly faded. For others, it was simply another reminder that even in palaces of gold, families still face moments of hurt, pride, and disagreement. Just when people thought the story had reached its peak, something remarkable came to light. A second letter, written long ago by Queen Elizabeth herself. It had been hidden deep within the royal archives, sealed carefully and marked to be opened only under special circumstances. And now, with the king's health failing, that moment had arrived. The letter, written in the final year of the late queen's life, carried words that seemed meant for this very day. In her delicate handwriting, she reminded her family that true strength was not in clinging to the crown, but in knowing the right time to pass it on. Her message was gentle yet powerful, a reminder that grace, not pride, should guide the throne when continuity falters. When the letter was revealed, it felt as though her wisdom had returned to steady the kingdom once more. Newspapers filled their front pages with pictures of her familiar handwriting, calling it her final guidance. To many, it felt as if the late queen had spoken from beyond, blessing the decision to temporarily hand over power. What could have been seen as confusion or panic was now viewed as an act of respect, a thoughtful and graceful move in the spirit of her legacy. The world reacted quickly. In London, people gathered outside Buckingham Palace, laying flowers and murmuring prayers for the royal family. Across the ocean, the White House praised King Charles for his courage and thanked Prince William for stepping up with maturity. The Pope sent his blessings, offering prayers for strength and healing. Far across the Commonwealth, in countries like Canada and Australia, leaders began to reflect on what this new moment meant for them. They weren't breaking away, but many could feel that history was quietly shifting, that a new chapter in the monarchy story might soon begin. Back home, the UK Parliament met on an unusual Sunday, something that almost never happened. The discussion wasn't about laws or politics this time. It was about the royal family and what would happen next. Though it was mostly symbolic, the meeting showed that the government was aware of the delicate situation and ready to stand beside the royal household. It was a day that felt both solemn and hopeful, a day when the wisdom of the past reached out to guide the future. Not everyone in Britain's elite circles was pleased with how quickly and quietly the shift of power happened. Many of the older palace staff, who had spent their entire lives following royal traditions and preparing for the day a monarch might pass, were unsettled. To them, everything felt rushed and unfamiliar. One longtime servant reportedly sighed to a newspaper, saying that the palace had always been trained to face the death of a king, not the slow fading of one still alive. It was a comment that showed just how deeply the old customs clashed with the reality of modern life and medical care. But outside those grand palace walls, the mood was far more understanding. People across the country seemed to accept the decision with compassion rather than criticism. A quick national survey revealed that most citizens, more than two-thirds, believed that letting Prince William step in as a temporary leader was both respectful and wise. It showed that people could separate the emotion of tradition from the logic of care. They saw that this wasn't about losing a king. It was about helping him heal and keeping the kingdom steady, the morning that changed the monarchy forever. Inside Sandringham, doctors stayed close to King Charles, carefully watching over him day and night. His condition often changed. Some days he would drift in and out of confusion, while at other moments he was clear, minded enough to ask gentle questions. Those who were there said that during one of his brief moments of clarity, the king quietly asked his doctor if the people were upset. The doctor reportedly smiled and told him that the nation wasn't angry at all, that they were proud of his courage and patience. Though no one can be sure those words were exactly spoken, the story touched many hearts. It captured the image of a weary king who still cared deeply about his people, even in his weakest hour. Then something happened that seemed small at first, but later became a symbol for the whole situation. The royal crown, the magnificent jewel that sits at the center of every coronation, was quietly moved from its glass display at the Tower of London to Windsor Castle. Officially, the palace said it was only being cleaned and preserved, but many believed there was a deeper meaning behind it. The crown wasn't displayed or worn by anyone. It simply rested in silence away from public eyes. To many, this gesture carried weight far beyond ceremony. The crown, once the shining symbol of active power, now sat still, neither claimed nor surrendered. It was as if the kingdom itself was holding its breath, waiting between two worlds, one that was ending and another quietly beginning. As the sun slowly sank behind the quiet fields of Norfolk, a calm but heavy feeling surrounded Sandringham. Inside one of the large rooms, Prince William sat across from Princess Anne. They didn't speak a single word, yet something deep passed between them. It was as if both already understood that the weight of the royal crown was quietly shifting. Their glances said more than words ever could. They were not just preparing for the future, they were already living it. By the next morning, newspapers across the world were filled with the same message. The royal family was entering a new chapter. It wasn't the usual story of a king passing away and a new one taking the throne. This time something different was happening. King Charles had stepped aside, not forever, but long enough for the country to keep running smoothly while he focused on his health. It was a rare moment in royal history, a change made out of care and wisdom rather than tragedy. Those who watched it unfold said it felt like time had paused between an ending and a beginning. There were no grand ceremonies, no parades, and no morning bells. Instead, there was calm respect and quiet understanding. Even the media, known for their love of drama, handled the story with surprising grace. The papers didn't shout with bold headlines. They spoke softly, calling it a peaceful passing of duty. At the heart of all this stood Prince William. Though not yet king in title, his role had changed overnight. He was now carrying out the tasks that once belonged to his father. When he appeared on television, seated in his father's study at Sandringham, his face carried both strength and sadness. The Princess of Wales was nearby, quietly supporting him as he spoke to the nation. His words were steady and full of care. He spoke not only as a leader, but as a son, watching his father grow weak too soon. His short message brought comfort to families everywhere who were facing illness or loss. People felt his heart through the screen. It was a message that united both the palace and people in shared emotion. Within minutes, his address spread across social media. Support poured in from every corner of the world. Leaders from the Commonwealth, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and many others sent warm messages filled with respect. And so in those quiet days, Britain watched its royal family walk through one of the most emotional moments in recent history. A king resting, a son stepping forward, a family holding together through love, loyalty, and the unspoken promise that the crown and the country would endure. And now we'd love to hear from you. Do you think this gentle shift in power marks only a temporary pause or the quiet beginning of a new royal era under Prince William? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this story so Catherine's strength and legacy continue to inspire hearts around the